We're all waiting. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nadia. Well, that feeling is entirely mutual. I feel deeply privileged to be a trustee at Claw, and it's come along at the perfect time for me. So my background is I spent 20 years in investment management in the city, and along the way I discovered or I found that the culture that I was working in and the values that were represented by leadership were felt so keenly across the organisation and were super important to our ability to both deliver and also the impact on individual employees. And I just couldn't understand why financial services has this tendency to think everything has to be kind of short term and money oriented. When I thought that it's so clear that the culture has a value. It's perhaps not being fully understood. So that took me off on a bit of a journey. That and then the arrival of AI. And I thought in the context of an environment where we're perhaps undervaluing the human a little bit and not thinking as clearly about values as we might, what happens when you introduce technology into that mix? And so I left the city in 2020. I did a master's in philosophy and AI, the first of its kind, in fact. So it's really looking at the ethics of AI. And then I went on and did another one in behavioral science, which is really thinking about our behavior collectively and how that manifests in organizational culture. And so now I work across AI ethics, organizational culture, and behavioral approaches to building trust in a digitalizing world so that organizations and their employees can flourish. That's kind of how in a nutshell. And in that context, the opportunity to be a Claude trustee just fits beautifully. Um, so there's a couple of things I'm going to talk about, and I will try not to get carried away like an inflating balloon, as I described it earlier to Nadia. But please do interrupt me if I start to take off. And hopefully I'll be about 15, 20 minutes. I'm going to talk through, what we mean by AI and why it genuinely is different this time. A little bit on AI ethics and the sorts of harms that we might need to look out for, but also the opportunities that it brings. What that means at a kind of human level, thinking about organisations, and then some suggestions for collaboration and managing generational difference before opening up to questions. If I start getting towards the 20-minute mark, Nadia, please do jump in and stop me in my tracks. Okay, so AI. So AI, I got involved with it because I thought it was going to be big. And I was worried about what it meant at work, partly because I was seeing various different kind of transformation projects coming in and going through a sequence of kind of stop start difficulties whereby individuals in the organization would resist that AI, the technology that was coming in on the basis that, well, if I give that my information, then where's my job go? But equally, companies were having to introduce it because they're thinking, well, all our competition are doing it. And if we don't get ahead of this, we're all toast. But what was ending up happening was that the transformations were not really working very well because there was a loss of trust between the employee and the organization about, well, why are you bringing this in? And is my job still going to be safe? And so employees were wasting money and individuals were feeling disenfranchised. So I went off on this AI journey. I thought it would be big. As I said, when I got into this, I thought, oh my goodness, this is so much bigger than I thought it was going to be. But on the plus side, there are so many brilliantly clever people all around the world working really hard on lots of ways in which we can do this in a human-centered way. So AI itself isn't new. It dates back to the 1950s, but the reason it genuinely is different this time in the last 15 years is that we have had breakthroughs across the piece in AI. So ChatGPT is kind of the sort of jazz hands of AI that's got everybody's attention because you don't have to be a tech person to interact with it and to see the power of it. But really, it's only one type of AI. We've got a whole range of different AI applications. But what you've seen in the last 10 years is those applications go through human level performance. That's what's different. So we are now, the definition of AI is an umbrella term that means something that's an application that's doing something it used to take a human to do, something that hitherto had to be done by a human that can now be done by technology. And so the performance of those technologies has achieved average human level or better over the last 5-10 years. And in turn, that has resulted in a huge investment. So if we managed to get breakthroughs before the big money came, now the big money's come. The second thing it means is the AI itself is working on itself. So we've seen actually the progress accelerate. We've seen a sort of exponential curve in terms of technological development. So it really is here to stay, and the applications and the potential of it are enormous, and probably to the extent that we can't necessarily visualize it all just yet. So what it is, I sort of gave the definition. In fact, the two terms specifically, artificial is because it's man-made, it's not naturally occurring, and intelligence because it does something that previously required a human to do. There are arguments about both those terms, just to make you aware of it. But I think what's a more helpful way of thinking about it, or the way I try and think about it, is what AI does is it takes huge amounts of data, it seeks patterns in those data in order to make predictions. That's what it is. It's a fantastically accurate, increasingly accurate prediction generator using huge data, finding patterns. What it is not, and it's important to distinguish that because what it is not is able to understand the data that's going in. Quite often, I hear people talk about AI bots as a he or a she, or saying, "Oh, it thought this." It doesn't actually understand. It's purely that data patterns. And a whole range of other human type aspects to intelligence that we can often assume that it has because normally a human would be doing that and you'd have all these other things around it like a sense of context, like the ability to make judgments, like the knowledge of what it is that the AI system is producing. And that's the bit it's missing, and that's part of the reason why there's this burgeoning field of AI ethics, because what it's saying is AI itself is suddenly doing all these jobs that used to be done by a human, but it doesn't have some of the attributes that humans bring automatically to that role. And so, therefore, we might need to think about how we can complement AI so that we don't accidentally find ourselves running into human harms. Um, just a word before I move on to AI ethics, which is that there is, there's a tendency for the media narrative around this to be all sort of, hype or despair. And I'd really encourage people to try not to get distracted by that, because the reality is it's both and neither. It's a tool that has enormous power. And so there are huge potential brilliant things it can bring. The breakthroughs that are possible in health, the access that might be available in education are, genuinely transformative to the human experience. But also in the wrong hands, it of course has the power to do damage. The question isn't whether the AI is intrinsically good or bad. It's about how we as humans use it and how we adapt to it, and what we put around it. So I would encourage everybody to not be sort of put off by that narrative and instead to get involved. So turning to AI ethics, that's, as I mentioned, really looking at the human impact of using this technology. It is the how we use it. Um, so there are a number of harms, I think, um, that have been noted, and they're getting increasing coverage. Things like bias and discrimination. So one of the reasons that happens is because the AI itself doesn't understand what it's looking at, as we mentioned. It's just taking it's taking the data of human experience. So if we have bias in the way data has been recorded, or if we have bias in our systems, then that's being encoded into the AI itself. Um, and I tend to think about this as appearing in four different parts. There's the data itself, then there's the pattern finding, the algorithm, then there's the deployment, how we're using the AI, and then there's drift. So however good the process is, it can move over time because AI is teaching itself continually. So to give you some examples of the sorts of harms, I know that was a question that came through on the text. Amazon has quite a famous example of this, where they invented a hiring tool. They thought, brilliant, we know there's human bias in hiring, and we know we only see a certain number of applicants. So maybe we could develop an AI tool that can sift through the internet for us and find us brilliant new candidates that we would never find ourselves. So that was the idea. What actually happened was the tool taught itself to exclude women. And because historically women haven't tended to have big role in tech or senior roles in tech, so the tool taught itself to exclude women. Amazon spent, I think, $3 million and 18 months with a whole team of trying to fix it. It turned out to be completely unfixable. It was so embedded in the algorithm, it actually had to be retired in the end. Another example would be facial recognition. So what we know is that there's been huge developments in facial recognition for AI, but what it's really good at doing is identifying white men, because that again is how it's been trained, and it's less good when you introduce different ethnicities or genders. And certainly black women are the least accurate. It's got the least accurate. So one of the concerns there, and this is particularly something that's been picked up by the Algorithmic Justice League in America, is that where an AI system is being used, say, for example, to give access to social housing, which is happening in some places, instead of a key, your face gets scanned to see whether you can get access, then that sort of inaccuracies are bringing real immediate harms. The third example I'd give you, and one of I was specifically asked about how a charity could be using AI in an unethical sense, and I think this gives a sense of it. I know this is a government example, but the Dutch government sought to use AI to try and identify welfare fraud, so that the AI identified certain risk patterns that might meant someone was more potential for fraud, but the mistake they made in deploying it was not to have enough human oversight about the flags that were being produced by the system. So the system just immediately automatically cut somebody off. If the system had flagged somebody as having some risk characteristics, benefits stopped, and they were presented with a bill for all their back payments of benefits. It did eventually get sorted out, but it took years. The human cost was enormous, and it actually brought down the government. Now, all of this is not to say we need to be scared of AI, but it's to say it's really, really, really important that we retain human oversight and that we are aware of its limitations. And specifically, I would say what that comes down to is the fact that AI is fantastically good at averages, but it's not very good at outliers. So when you're using AI in general, being aware of its limitations, I think, is one of the most important things that we can do. The other thing I wanted to mention from a human impact point of view, and especially when thinking about organisational use of it, is the sense of dependency. So again, one of the things that we found is that when people introduce AI systems, sometimes it's a good question. When when people are employing AI systems, sometimes they can just defer to the tech. The assumption, and that I guess would be the example we saw with the Dutch government there. And I guess you could say the same thing has happened in terms of the post office. You know, once you assume that what's coming out of the technology is right, and you sort of discount the human experience, that's one of the human harms that can follow from kind of what you might say is unthinking adoption of technology, or not doing enough to make sure that the human stays in the piece. The second thing that can happen when AI comes in is a de-skilling. Again, if everything's suddenly being done by the tech, do you lose those abilities within the team to do it yourself? And another thing that's coming through from an organizational point of view is how do you manage training and talent development if suddenly some of the steps in a process are being done by AI where they used to be part of the training ground for people. So these would be examples of some of the kind of human impact things that AI ethics tries to consider, and that when you're thinking about organizational change and how you adopt AI, that it's worth being mindful of. Before moving on to organisations themselves, I just wanted to say a little word on ESG and environmental impact, because that again was some of the questions that came through. I think there's been quite a lot of coverage in recent times about the environmental impact of AI. So I think there's a growing awareness that the power demands of algorithmic development and training and data processing are significant. There's a big power demand, and there's a need for water to cool the servers, and there's mining demands for lithium, and all of those things have a negative environmental impact. But it's also important to note that AI has fantastic potential in terms of helping to identify clean tech innovations, that it can be really helpful for things like optimizing energy usage, and for better reporting. So one of the points I wanted to make with this is that we absolutely need to be mindful of the environmental cost of AI, but it's another one of those things where there isn't a binary here. There isn't is AI good or bad for the environment? It's how we use it that matters, and it has both features. So what I tend to try and advise people when I'm talking about AI is use it intentionally. Don't just use it as a default. When you're using AI, have it as a purpose, use it strategically, but beware that casual use of it can be contributing to emissions in a way that perhaps you weren't not so mindful of. The same is true for social aspects. There are negative social aspects to AI, such as all the people labeling the data at $1 a day, and some of the harms that we've talked about. But there are also huge positives on the social front, such as the expansion of access to education, such as enabling a lot of Africa to have access to financial systems. There's social engagement and empowerment, as well as social harms. So it's not a binary. It's all about how we use it. And I would say that's another reason why I would encourage the likes of CLAW social leaders to get involved in the conversation. So let's turn to organizations themselves, which are fundamentally human. I think that's something that you get in the third sector, perhaps more intuitively than the private sector sometimes thinks about. Being mission driven as a driver rather than profit driven means that thinking is probably more naturally there. Um, and within organizations, I've said at the beginning, I think that culture is a really important driver. It's one of the most important things. It binds an organization together. It sets the priorities, the values, um, and it can be both an asset and a liability, shall we say? So culture as an asset is about those kind of collaborative problem solving. It helps motivate. It helps create a sense of community. You can kind of live some shared values. Those are all assets of culture. Where culture isn't working so well, or where the sort of the downside of culture can be things like groupthink and resistance to change. And culture is effectively social learning. It's how we kind of come together as a community and make sense of things together. So it is affected by and it affects transformation. I think of it in terms of kind of let's say three different levels. There's the sort of superficial level, which is the bit you can see and hear, which is the communication that we use, the language and the stories that we tell. There's the sort of next level down, which is the sense of community, the norms and the teamwork. And then below that, the kind of more intrinsic beliefs, how decisions are made. When you think about how AI may be deployed in organizations, you can see that every single one of those layers can and will be affected. How we communicate, who is doing the communicating, how the structures of teams work, how decisions are made. These are all questions that will be addressed or that will come up through a transformation process. And I think, again, having culture at the heart of your transformation is the way to harness it in the most productive way. The private sector hasn't had a brilliant track record of transformations. In fact, McKinsey puts the failure rate for corporate transformation at 70%, which is surprisingly high. But the main driver of that failure is a lack of attention to the human and the cultural aspects, which again, I think, hopefully the third sector has a sort of natural advantage for. What I would say is, I think transformation is coming. I know it's not comfortable for everybody, but what I've hopefully just laid out in terms of the power of AI and how fast it's developing means it's coming anyway. We are moving into a period of change. So finding a way to absorb that and take it on collectively as an organization, trying to do so in a way that is kind of human first and really kind of strategic and intentional about how it will serve you, making sure that the tech serves you rather than that you're serving the tech. These are the sorts of hallmarks, I think, of the organizations who will be able to thrive through this period of change. Things to sort of be aware of as tech comes in is a declining, risks around declining levels of trust, risks around reputation, as there are certain things that are done in different ways. Your kind of protection mechanisms may or may not work, and particularly depersonalization and disintermediation. I think these are the kind of human aspects to be mindful of as you go on this journey. There is a generational divide here. I think we're at kind of an interesting point in the workplace. We've got 4 different generations. I know it's a shorthand and it's flawed, but if we just use it for these discussion purposes, you've got baby boomers, you've got Gen X like me, you've got millennials, and then you've got Gen Z. And increasingly, the majority of the workplace is millennial and Gen Z. It's not necessarily, particularly in the corporate world, it's not necessarily the majority of the decision making, but it's the majority of the people. And there's quite a big divide. Two hallmarks I would say of that divide. The first is economic. The Gen X's and the boomers are I'm not suggesting it's perfect by any means, but they're in a very different economic environment to those younger generations, and what they have to gain from the system it is different. I think there's less vested interest in preserving systems that we've got because they're not necessarily delivering in the same way for some of those younger people, and they can't necessarily look at an economic future that feels secure. The second difference is that they are tech natives, they're digital natives. They've grown up with the internet. They've grown up with disruption. They've got the idea that every 2 or 3 years there's going to be some new exciting product that's going to be produced by someone that's going to change how we do everything. For those generations, tech change is natural. It's a given. It's not frightening. It's exciting. And if anything, it means there's less interest, there's less vested interest in maintaining the status quo. If anything, if something hasn't changed for a while, that means it's probably ripe for a bit of change. That's a very different kind of cultural norm than my generation, perhaps, and the boomers, who, in line with the whole rest of human history, have said we learn by taking what our forefathers, what those who came before us did, and we iterate and we improve on it. But we assume that when we've inherited something, we're inheriting something that is the product of collective intelligence over thousands of years. So that's a massive change. And I think it's these mindsets are something, again, to be mindful of during these change, but also maybe something to play into. We know that it's more likely that you'll have tech fear from some of the older workers. So how do we take them on that journey, and how do we get them comfortable with it? How do we create an environment where they can kind of play and engage and see possibility? And maybe this is an area where some of the younger generations can lead. Maybe this is an opportunity to harness some of that creativity, some of that sense of disruption, and do some cross-generational work. That feels like a facilitation waiting to happen. But anyway, I think there's real potential for recognizing these really quite profound differences in the organization, but bringing them together. And that brings me to my final point before I'll shut up and give somebody else a chance to speak, which is about collaboration. And I really profoundly believe that the future is collaboration. I think we're coming out of an environment, a kind of economic and political and social model, which is all about competition. The idea of capitalism effectively is everybody kind of tries to solve something, and then you compete for best idea wins. That just doesn't work anymore. That we've got we're dealing with situations that are too complex, too interconnected, too fast moving for everybody to come up with their own idea of how to fix it and then compete for who's got the best one. No, I know this is slightly different in the third sector, but I think it permeates as a norm throughout society. Instead, I think we are ripe for collaboration and collective learning. This is the perfect moment for collective intelligence, where we all, like, you deal with that bit of the problem, I'll deal with this bit of the problem, and then we'll share notes. And there's still plenty of opportunity for individuals or companies to prosper within that. You have your own, versions of what the answer is, but there's no point everybody duplicating the effort. We will be left behind, and we won't get on top of it. So collaboration, I think, is the future. I think that works within the workplace. I think it's appropriate outside of the workplace, within sectors, and I think it's appropriate across sector. So examples would be Anthropy, which has been a brilliant platform for kind of a new initiative 2 years ago, but to say, hey, everybody, let's actually collaborate and listen to each other and build a kind of collective understanding. There's also Citizen Collective, which is John Alexander's project, which is another example of this. So, and there are more and more, by the way. I think these things are springing up more and more. So I think the tide is turning. It just maybe hasn't hit that tipping point where it's the new social norm, but I think it's coming. The final point I'd like to make is about part of this change of mindset, and this picks up on a couple of questions that came through, is about moving from a knowledge mindset to a skills and a curiosity mindset. When I was growing up, you learned facts and you learned how to do stuff. You just don't need to do that anymore. It's there. Knowledge is infinite and free and available to everybody. It's not about what you know anymore. It's about skills. It's about critical thinking. It's about being able to understand, to take the knowledge that's coming out at you and to be able to question it, or to understand how to apply it, or to understand what's the next question I need to ask. It's questions, not answers. Perhaps I could put it that way. And that is also a mindset. That's and again, thinking about those generational shifts. If you're a boomer and you've come through an environment where you're supposed to be the repository of all the collective knowledge of human endeavor till now, it's about you knowing the answer. That's not the world we're in anymore. We're now in a world where who's asking the questions, and encouraging and building our curiosity quotient, I think, is one of the most powerful things we can do in this, and something that, as leaders of organizations, I highly suggest that you do both yourselves and within your organizations. And I think it's flipping that switch from an idea that education is just something you do up until the age of 21 or 18 or 16 or whenever, and then you go and work, to the sense of actually education is about lifelong learning. Now, I know a lot of educators are looking at how to apply AI in the classroom, and we're early days on that journey. All this stuff is so new, but I do know there are a number of initiatives through the Turing Institute, through the Department of Education, where they're looking at, okay, so we now need to change the way we're testing. So, for example, instead of being afraid of ChatGPT or generative AI, instead of thinking, oh no, how do we know if it's plagiarism or not? Instead, let's make the assessment. What are the prompts you put in? So you want to ask this question using ChatGPT. What are the questions you should be asking? How do you know whether what you're getting out is right or not? It's a different skill set. And so yeah, education needs to catch up with that. But they're on the journey. We're all on this journey together, and it's early days. Shall I pause there, because I've probably been talking quite a long time, and
Thanks, Annabel. To those at the beginning who heard me say every time I speak to Annabel, it's an education, I think you know exactly. I think you know exactly what I mean right now. Thank you. That was really, really insightful. And just off the top, I mean, I'm no expert in AI, far from it. Just off the top of my head, though, just interesting. I think interesting things that that came up was especially related to, I suppose, the core social leaders and organizations that we work with. Thoughts such as humans can also be an asset or a liability.
right.
I think some of the issue is I think if you're slightly on the outside, you're told AI is it's the answer. Like, you don't have to do anything anymore. You don't have to think, and it's really quick and it's the answer, which obviously it's not. We're kind of at a piloting stage, but obviously we have to open it up to the masses, which may dumb it down. Well, like I think you were talking about, did you say the shifts or did you say the drift?
Drift, well, with drift, it's more that once you've got an algorithm working, it will continue to teach itself. So you can have an algorithm you've done all the testing, you've debiased it as far as you can, it's all kind of safe, and then you've let it loose on the wild, and then it can drift as it teaches itself. So again, an example of this would be, I think there are a couple of bots that have been released. I think Microsoft released a bot saying, okay, we've done all the testing, and then they put it out it started tweeting. And lots of people just thought, how can we break this? And they spent 15 hours just feeding it loads of horrible racist. It took about 15 hours, I think, to break what will have taken them years of training, to think, how can we retrain it? So that's the thing I mean about drift. So that even if you've got AI that's working today, the point at which you switch off and think, I'm not going to question the output anymore, that should never happen, because it can always be drifting. And I think one of the risk factors, see, again, this is where we get the AI thing wrong sometimes. The risk isn't AI itself. The risk is what we do as humans in response to that AI. And so that switching off is one of the biggest risks that I see. And there's studies showing this, that the better the AI is, the better we know the AI is, the more we switch off. So the better the AI becomes generally, it would be a mistake for us to underplay the importance of our own intelligence. When you bring tech and human together, it's much better than either one independently. But it means you need to recognize the strengths of each. So we will never be able to compute data or process information like AI can, never. But there's all sorts of things we can do that AI can't do, like bring judgment and context. That it doesn't fundamentally understand what it is, what the data is it's doing. So yes, sorry, I've gone off on another tangent. But anyway, the important point is that we don't accept it uncritically, that we work with it, that we recognize that it's a hugely powerful tool. We absolutely should be using it. But the how is the really important bit. So whenever anyone asks, like, is it good or bad, it's the wrong question. How do we do it? How do we do it so it's most sustainable? How do we do it so it's most creative? How do we harness as many voices as possible into what our AI future should look like? To quote disability activism, I really think it applies to tech. Nothing about us without us. And tech is going to change the environment that we work in, that we live in. So we need to have our voices heard, and we need to find those kind of collaborative, participatory forums in which we can do that, and I think they're coming.
Lovely, thank you. And were there any other? We know that we were talking about the questions that came out of the registrations, the other day.
Yeah.
Sorry, people signed up. Sorry, and I'm just wondering if there was something in there as well as people putting. Please do put your questions in the chat function. I know that there are a couple here, so.
Let me just pick up on a couple from the questions before. A couple of people asked about how to do organizational oversight and practical application of AI ethics and what boards can do. And I would say this is exactly the right time to be asking these questions, because a ton of really good work has come to fruition recently. So AI principles, there are millions of those. In fact, there are way too many. So what I would suggest you do is just go to the OECD. They're really nice, simple 5 principles. They've been internationally approved. They've been adopted in countries all. Just go there, and they've got a huge repository. They call it the observatory, and it's got tons and tons of information about if you need it. But if you don't need it, they've made it sort of headline simple, and then there's as much more as you want to dig into. And then what has been happening in the last couple of years is more sense of how do you practically apply these. In fact, I'll send the resources afterwards, but I would say go to this work has already been done. So go to the source, don't try and reinvent the wheel. And in terms of how you do it as a board, I think it is quite difficult if you don't have the skill set already there on the board. And I know how busy boards are already. And I'm wondering, this is just an idea, but whether there's some scope for collaboration here, whether rather than every single charity trying to identify a way of doing this collectively, whether there's some way of having some kind of collective oversight that individual charities can tap into. I don't know if that would be workable, but it just strikes me as in everything here, the more we can, divide the costs and multiply the impact, the better, perhaps. So that's the first point. But there is a lot of existing guidance, so you don't need to start from scratch. And I'll send on the resources. Second point is about how to use it safely. And I wanted to, people talked about privacy. Privacy is absolutely key. So yes, I use 3 rules for Gen AI. If you're going to use it intentionally. Don't put anything sensitive in it, and check whatever you get out of it. I really think it's as simple as those 3 rules. But yes, privacy is absolutely key, and anything you put into a generative AI is gone. So just absolutely anonymize where possible, and be mindful of that. How to use it safely? I would love to see, and again, this is a challenge that that perhaps somebody here can take on, but there are a lot of tech companies that have an allowance for people to do useful stuff. So Google, for example, has an 80-20 rule where you work on specific projects for 80% of the time, and 20% you do your own stuff. And I've come across a social media agency recently that does the same thing. They all get a day a week to do pro bono stuff. So it strikes me that they could be the answer here to helping run, create environments where charity leaders can come and figure out how to play safely. I really think we need to get into a kind of playful. You only really know this stuff once you start interacting with it, but of course there are worries about safety. So I wonder if tech companies and their pro bono allowances might be the answer for that.
That's a
So I
really good
think,
point. I was just gonna. Oh, sorry, Annabelle.
yeah, no, I'll just hand over there.
No,
Yeah.
because that's such a good point, because there are so many small organizations out there who are like, this has saved me 3 days in 5 minutes. And it's really hard, that an intentional piece. But if there's support from potential support from corporates who can offer pro bono, that would be incredible. And actually, even if there is some on the call who might want to email us afterwards, you can not for Claude, I mean for the community, then we can definitely share that when we share the video. So that would be really good. Thank you. I'm not gonna lie, I'm gonna struggle because there are so many questions. There are so many interesting questions as well. I'm going to ask 1 or 2, and we might have to be a bit quick with the questions and answers. But then I do want to see if anyone wants to ask their question. Forgive me, I will ask if you wanted to come off mute and ask your question, if you could ask it as succinctly as possible, because we haven't got much time left. So we have to leave about 5 minutes towards the end, so we don't infringe on anyone's time beyond our webinar.
Could I also just say, Nadia, if we don't get to any questions, I'm very happy to follow up afterwards with so if we if we could do all the questions, if we can just take them off the chat and the Q&A.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, that would be lovely. So if everyone posts their questions on the chat, then we can maybe in an email afterwards do that. That's lovely, thank you. So from Zen, forgive me if I haven't pronounced your name correctly. AI may be coming, but have we yet solved the problem of intellectual property theft? It's a bit of an issue.
No, we haven't. Yes, absolutely. No, look, it's really tricky, this, and this won't be the only issue where the arrival of AI means we have to rethink something that's gone before. I actually I run a tech ethics network called Conversations on AI, and we did a session on creativity in June where we looked at exactly this, and we had an IP lawyer give a very muscular defense of AI. saying that, look, it's just a new tool, and every time there's a new creative tool that comes along, we go through these sort of machinations, and what we need to do is figure out what the economic model and what the legal model is around IP, and that is happening now. So it's not resolved now. There are a number of lawsuits happening in the US, which is typically the way that America explores these issues, and there are active conversations happening in Europe, which tends to be more how Europe solves these issues. But I would say it's underway now, and it's not fixed. And I think I would share, if your concern is you would worry that the tech companies are just hoovering up all the content and ownership of creatives and not sharing the wealth. I think anyone who's not in a tech company feels that way. So finding the balance is something that is actively underway, but it's not done yet.
Thank you. Would anyone, I'm looking through the chat as well, but would anyone like to put their hand up if they wanted to ask a question rather than put it in chat for any reason? And again, if you could ask it as succinctly as possible, that would be wonderful, please. And in the meantime, looking through this chat, and I would invite my colleagues, Steve and Charlotte, if you wanted to suggest any questions that have been put in here. People are being shy, perhaps they're not putting their hands up. There is one here about what does Annabel think of regulations such as the EU AI Act, please?
Yes, right. So short answer, we need some. At the moment, to quote Stuart Russell, who is the guy who literally wrote the textbook on AI, your sandwich is more highly regulated than AI. And clearly, given the power of AI, not having any regulation doesn't make sense. I would also say, this will hopefully echo my earlier comments. I reject the binary of like it's regulation or innovation. It's actually about having the right regulation, that empowers companies to innovate safely is the answer, is the ideal answer. I don't think the EU AI Act gets there. There are issues with it, but there are going to be issues with all of these things. So we're going to have to, we can't expect perfection first time round. It's important that we have that first step. The UK is taking a different approach to regulation than Europe. Europe is regulating the AI itself, whereas the UK intends to regulate the outcome of the AI, so the application of it. So it's kind of sector specific. And then the US, don't know. The US was taking a different approach again. Of course, we've got a change of government coming in the US. So what that looks like, I'm still trying to figure out what Elon Musk in the White House means for AI ethics and technology generally. But the reality is that we're in a global world for a lot of this tech companies, and we've got different regional approaches to regulation. So it is going to be complex. I'm suggesting to companies when I speak to them that actually AI ethics is the way to navigate all of that, because if you figure out what your high level principles are, and you figure out how you're going to implement those and operationalize them, that should kind of regulation proof you whichever approach people take, that it's a simpler way, and it's a way that you can align with your strategy and values more effectively than trying to follow a kind of compliance route. Because the other thing is tech is so fast moving, regulation is backward looking and slow and specific and jurisdictional, and tech is forward looking and fast and global. So regulation will always be behind. So if you want to actually future-proof whatever you're doing, you can't do it to today's regulation. You need to be thinking about where it might go, and you actually slightly need to come back to first principles about what does good look like. And if you can get the right AI ethics principles, I think it's a much more efficient way of doing it. Of course, you need to be compliant with the regulation, but I don't think you can follow the regs. The regs are sort of the braces, if you like. You also need the belt. Or that's probably the wrong answer. But anyway, you know what I mean.
Thank you. Thanks. And then I think we've got time for a couple more. There is an interesting one here related to the sector. So does digital transformation, AI transformation of this sector, so the social sector, require tailor-made tools that are unique to the ways of working in this sector?
Ooh.
It's longer. That is, we won't be able to simply direct.
That's an interesting question. I mean, there'll be a lot that can generally apply. Anything that's about, say, for example, not having to write a meeting note because the AI is doing it for you. There's a lot of things that can be automated that apply whoever your organization is. But yeah, I'm sure there will be. I suppose the difficulty for the charity sector is mostly you're probably receiving off-the-shelf AI, which companies are making available for charities at a cheaper price, rather than being able to buy and design something for yourself. So you know, it's a bit more difficult when you're a receiver, unless, again, coming back to the theme of collaboration, unless there's some way in which, you know, charities could collectively, you know, work to figure out some applications that would be specifically good for the third sector, and on that kind of collective basis negotiate with a Google or whoever to develop something for them specifically. I don't think it would be. I don't think tech companies would be able to do it on a piecemeal basis, but they might very well be able to do it as a kind of one hit. So that would be my recommendation there.
Thank you. Yep, and I know you talk to lots of different organizations and deliver workshops. So one person has asked, I'm interested to know from an organizational perspective how organizations are budgeting / applying for funding for general AI knowledge building, but also bigger projects AI could be a part of. No one seems to know how much it costs and have been quoted huge amounts for workshops.
Oh, really? Okay. I'm happy to pick that up offline. I think the Turing Institute would be my first suggestion of a place to go. I know they've been working on this. Also, again, thinking about that, corporates who do pro bono training ought to be like right at the top of their list. And just for those who don't know, I don't know whether charities would be caught in this, but under the EU AI Act, you probably wouldn't be actually if you're a UK charity. But anyway, under the EU AI Act, companies now have a legal requirement to train staff. AI literacy has become a corporate liability. So I would expect to see a lot more training provision, and hopefully sometimes when people develop things for one audience, they can then make it available to a charitable audience at a better price. I've certainly seen some fantastically good examples of corporate training. So we'll pick it up afterwards, Nadia. But I do wonder if there's scope for approaching a couple of these corporates and saying, you know, would you be willing to make this available to a charity audience? You know, you'd hope there's be some scope for that. But yeah, I'll follow up on that with some resources. I do think the Turing might have something to say there as well.
Amazing.
And
Thank
ODI
you.
as well for data. The Open Data Institute definitely does pro bono training.
Lovely, thank you. Sorry, my clumsy fingers just got rid of the Zoom screen, which wasn't very helpful. That's lovely. So I think what we'll have is one more question, but again, please put your questions in the chat, as Annabel very kindly offered to help with these, and we can send them around afterwards. I know that we've helped with one of our audience members with this, but just to ask you as well, Annabel, is there a place that we can find different AI tools in terms of comparison of the tools and what they can do, and also the costs involved in subscribing to them?
Yeah, there are.
Sorry,
there
and just
are.
the plinth is something that was mentioned.
Okay, great. Well, I get mine from a different. I mean, I must admit, I'm now drowning in AI newsletters. When I first got involved in this 3 or 4 years ago, there weren't any. Now my inbox is overflowing. But there are a couple of quite good platforms that do make those comparisons. So again, I'll put that in resources to follow up. Yeah.
Thank you. Lovely. Any final questions? I think we'll be able to do afterwards, if that's all right. So kind follow up from Annabel. But keep them coming, please do. It's a really big topic. We're not going to have dealt with it all within an hour, even
No chance.
Exactly. But yeah, Annabel is very close to us at Claw Social Leadership, obviously. So any questions, please do get in touch, and we'll be pleased to kind of facilitate that and try and take them on. Annabel, I don't know how to thank you for this. Thank you very much for giving
not
up.
at all. My pleasure. Yeah.
It's been incredible. It really has. And I know, judging by the comments in the chat, that I'm not the only one that thinks that. Certainly not. It's been really insightful. It's been incredibly helpful, because we're all kind of battling alone. Feels a bit, you know, but we are a little bit, you know, and especially in smaller organizations, it's a bit of a godsend, but we don't always realize the impact that it's having, whether it's environment or ethics, whatever that looks like. So thank you. We're really, really grateful for that. And also a bit of a final thought is from me is thinking about, you were talking about best practices, and that just seems to chime with effective social leadership.
Right.
That we talked about collaboration.
100%.
Yeah, coming together, human-centered, so on and so forth. So yeah. Very grateful for that. Thank you so much. And to everyone else, as mentioned, the recording will be out in the coming days. I'm very aware of everyone's time. We're all busy at the moment, so I didn't want to go longer than the advertised webinar time. So it brings us to the end of the segment with Annabel. Annabel, thank you again. And hopefully we'll be seeing you more at Claw social events and sessions and things like that. So if anyone is interested, please do sign up to our newsletter. We'll send out information on that afterwards. I just also, as promised, wanted to point out a few really interesting developments that we have at Claw Social, which is alongside our kind of flagship emerging leader and experienced leader program, which is there for social leaders. Social leaders, when we say leader, we mean people working across organizations in a social purpose capacity. We don't just mean the CEOs or directors of an organization. We are all leading in our own way, whether it's a project, a team, whatever that looks like. So we've got our emerging and experienced leaders program that are open, and some new fantastic developments from our side is also for strategic decision makers. So that is along the lines of more experienced more experienced leaders, sorry. We have a few places left on our strategic leader action learning sets. Again, links will be sent afterwards. That's a really a space where you can talk about challenges, opportunities, whether it's facilitated with peers. You're facilitated to then look at problems differently, come to solutions by yourself with the help of your peers. It's an incredibly important space. It feels like that even more so in the climate we're in currently, but also for the for those in the international development sector. We've got a really exciting offer there for emerging leaders. So those are people who are kind of dabbling, who have experience, albeit slightly limited, maybe up to about 3 years of working in a strategic capacity. And that's to make sure that your self-awareness, your strengths, your management of others, and ultimately your collaboration and creating inclusive cultures is strengthened. So please do take a look at those too. Feel free to share it with your contacts and colleagues as well. And apart from that, the only other thing I would say is it is really challenging out there at the moment. It's not an easy time, whether we look globally, nationally, or anything else. So just as a parting message, please do take care of yourselves. Please look after each other. Do reach out if there's anything that Claw Social can do. We also, it's not just about Claw Social. We have a really large network of incredible people across the sector and beyond, whether that's within our organization, trustees, our alumni, partners, whoever that might be. So please do reach out. There are things that we could possibly support you with in any capacity. And that just leads me to say thank you again to Annabel. Thank you to everyone who's joining. And I hope you have a lovely day, everyone. Thank you very much.